What's the matter, Kakarot?
Good morning, and welcome to another Sunday service with the Blurred Church of Anime. Who am I? I'm your preacher, your teacher, your cult leader, whatever you want to call me. But just know that my name is Black Star, here to kick you with another, hopefully, inspirational message to get you through your week. Inspirational may be that keyword because I don't know if this might be inspiring as I hoped it would be. But before we get into all of that, how was your week this past week? Mine was okay actually. It was standard, like not really bad. Got more time back than I expected. Got a chance to see a couple of movies. I went to the Spider-Man movie last night, the new one, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Thoroughly enjoy it. You may see my shirt. Yes, I did not wear that to the theater because that's not the Spider-Man I went to go see, but we are talking about this Spider-Man, so buckle up. But getting ahead of myself, it was a pretty cool week. I had a lot of things going on, and it just, did as I needed to do. How was your week? I hope your week was great. I hope you had some fun times. I hope you had productive times. I hope you had time to chill. And if you didn't, if you had a terrible week, if things just did not go your way, if, paths just kept getting blocked, things just kept happening to like really take you out of the moment. You got hacked because a friend of mine did. I wanted to say, like we do every week, F last week. Yeah, we believe that this week's going to be better. And we're hoping, we're throwing it out to the universe. We're putting all the energies, the karma, all the stuff out there that next week will be better because you can't just keep having terrible weeks. Good weeks have to come too. With that said, as I kind of opened up, of course, it's Spider-Man weekend. Brand New Day is opening to much fanfare. Everyone's going to go see it. And like I said, I don't want to quite talk about that Spider-Man yet, although I'm sure I'm going to bring it in because it's top of my mind. But part of it was, it is August, and I have been watching for past week or so Static Shock on Tubi. And I found out that Study Shock is going away at the end of August. So like I'm really like crunching through those episodes. So if you haven't watched Static Shock or you just want to relive Static Shock all four seasons, catch it on Tubi before it's gone at the end of August this month. But it kind of reminded me like how, or I was kind of thinking how Static is like, at least this version of Static in the WB DC animated universe is like DC's version of Spider-Man because of the witty combats while fighting crime. And then, just some of the similarities between both Static and Virgil and Miles Morales, aka our Spider-Man, which is the one we're talking about today. Because there's a lot has been going on. And while I said I had an interesting week and not a completely bad week, I am living in a city where we are actually dealing with some direct action after a police shooting, a police killing, some would call murder. And I've been having lots of conversations around that. Lots of people who, feel invisible. A lot of people who are wondering why folk care so much. A lot of, just back and forth in a very contentious city and a very contentious state with some elections coming up. So a lot of statements are being made by politicians and budding accountability for the officers involved in the shooting of a Black person in the streets. And so all this does come together, and the conversation I want to have around, when do you decide that the system is no longer safe? Like that is, I think that is the thesis statement to kind of what I'm cooking up here for our today's conversation, our message. And how am I using Miles Morales as that piece? And it's, stay with me. I hope we get there because there's a couple of stories I want to share, a couple of things I want to make sure everybody understands on where the thinking is on this. So I'm going to start off by saying I am ACAB. And when I say ACAB, all cops are bastards. For me, it's not about the individual police officer or cop. For me, it's about a system. I grew up around a lot of Black cops. They were neighbors, they were within my church, they were people whose families I knew. And to be very honest, for 18 years of my life, the idea of being stopped, detained, even arrested by a cop in the city I grew up in wasn't any fear. It more so it was like embarrassment or knowing that I'll be grounded the rest of my life because word, but before I even get to the station, I feel like word would get out to my dad. And my dad worked with police officers. He was a police officer chaplain. So just always went around that thing. So like my idea is like me in trouble when police officer involved means like whatever I was trying to do gets exposed to the world, and that's super embarrassing for a teen. It is what it is. Like cops were good guys. I left home at 18 to go off to college, went to many different cities. And in the first city I went to, DC, I had some rude awakenings. And not even that, like, we got to be aware of white cops, but even very, very soon in being in DC, like, even black cops can be dangerous. That police officers are their own people with their own biases and a system that allows them to act on those biases. And then I moved to New York City, where I learned to videotape cops, as well as, again, learning that the system is not set up for people. Because it's the idea of watching the people I'm around, watching the people who are walking down the street with me be randomly stopped and frisked. Because I was in New York during that time, that was also legal. And, seeing what it does to a person who is treated like a criminal on the suspicion of just being young and black, you know? Um, then I moved to Boston, and there were times where I had the police called on me because I lived out of place in a neighborhood. The neighborhood I lived in, people thought I was so suspicious, and having to like deal with cops in that way, which was never fun. And then finally, I moved to Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma City, I think where I finally was like, no, the system is all the way effed. And a lot of the trust, even in good cops I had, was a lot shattered is the Daniel Holtzclaw situation. Because I was there for that. And if you haven't looked up that case, I do think you should. But Daniel Holtzclaw is a former Oklahoma City police officer who's, I think, serving like 200 plus years in jail now for sexually assaulting black women, multiple black women. And while like on duty, that was the thing he would do on duty, was sexually assault black women. And if you are looking it up, you'll probably, especially more recently, since like 10 years since his sentencing, you're gonna see a lot of, not a lot, but you're gonna definitely see some people who are online saying that he's innocent, this was a frame job. Um, he couldn't have possibly done all these things. And it's, as someone who lived through that situation or just being involved in there in Oklahoma during that time, it's wild to think that people believe that this guy is innocent and that he needs another trial. And it goes back to, what does it mean to be the perfect victim? Because he chose his victims for reasons that are constantly being brought up and people believing that he's innocent. Like, they're running head first into the reason why he chose the victims he did. But I say all that to say there comes a part in my life, and this is like very personal, of where, again, it's not about the individual people, because I do know folk who are police officers. I do know folk who joined for all the right reasons. They truly believe that they want to keep the public safe. They truly believe they want to help folk, that this is a calling for them. But this is a system. And when I say a system, I need you to understand this is not just like individual cops. One bad apple will ruin a bunch, but it is a system that itself is problematic. The history of policing is about protecting wealthy men's property, especially when Black people were still considered property. And and that's not just me saying that. That's not just me saying, oh, the history of like back in the day. Like, no, we actually have Supreme Court cases that back that up, where there's Supreme Court cases that tell you that cops do not have to put themselves in dangers to save civilians, to support or help civilians. Like, serve and protect who? Because there's multiple cases in which cops cannot be sued because of inaction, where they decided it was too risky for them to go in and save somebody or to stop something from happening. Like, they're not there to actively prevent crime against citizens by another private person, which is wild when you're thinking like, well, aren't they there for public safety? And I'd say like, no, I think the system is proving they're there for public order. And what does it look like when you are out of order? And I know for a lot of us, that could be really hard to take when you're taught to trust the system or trust in these individuals. And so I do bring this back to Miles Morales because I love the Spider-Verse movies. Like they were a joy to watch. I was not a big fan when they first announced it, that thinking that they were making Miles Morales into an animated movie. I was like, we never get live actions. It really, really pissed me off. But once I saw the movie, I kind of over my intentions. It was a one like Into the Spider Verse was so 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 good. I loved Into the Spider Verse. It was such a amazing amazing movie, and it became a comfort movie for me actually for a while. And then to do the next Across the Spider Verse, where we get to see all these. I'm not trying to get into the movies because if you haven't seen them, just they're just amazing. And then now with Beyond the Spider Verse, hopefully coming in 2027, and I don't know how we're gonna like wrap this all up. I loved the storytelling. I loved how they allowed me to fall in love with Miles Morales all over again. And I'm gonna be very honest, like Spider Man isn't my favorite of the heroes for reasons I will kind of get into, but not really. But I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Miles Morales because brown Spider-Man, black Latino, all the things, and I did have the first few issues of the Ultimate Spider-Man when he became the Spider-Man. But I really really loved the Into the Spider-Verse and introducing us to Miles. And I think Spider Man's a very interesting hero, not just with Miles, but across all the Spider-Mans, because he is a hero that does try very, very hard to work with the police. And varying, how do I put this? With varying luck, because it depends on the story being told. If it's early Spider-Man versus later Spider-Man, like sometimes they want to get Spider-Man the key to the city, versus sometimes they are hunting Spider-Man because he's a vigilante. So we do see a lot of, but like Spider-Man has never really been antagonistic towards cops because he realized that those are not the villains for him. Like this is not a Batman story where you have corrupt cops everywhere. This is really just, police, again, doing their job, and Spider-Man oftentimes trying to save them, make their job a little bit easier while also having to run and hide from them. We see that definitely with Spider-Gwen, where she is Spider-Girl because, her father, who is a police chief, believes that Spider-Girl kills Peter Parker, and we kind of see that a little bit with Miles, with his dad as his police chief. And, Miles is like, I'm just trying to be your friendly Spider Man and work with y'all. But, anytime Spider Man is seen to have done something wrong, something illegal, then all the guns come out of blazing. He is a wanted criminal. And we see these things bounce back and forth. Like, no good deed ever goes unpunished because the minute Spider Man might be a nuisance, that's when the system switches on him. But I find it very interesting for both Spider Gwen and for Miles to have parents that are top ranking police officials. So Miles, I think, has been kind of taught to trust the system in a way because, living with a father who's a cop, knowing that in general they're good people, while also simultaneously having Uncle Aaron there and seeing that, like, though that perspective from his dad about what it means to be a good person doesn't quite hit his Uncle Aaron, and you see Miles have to kind of like contend with the contradictions of that. What's really interesting in Into the Spider Verse, when Miles first gets bitten by the spider and he has these different colorways, is that like a lot of his colorways match his Uncle Aaron until he meets Peter Parker, and then they kind of get on the same like red blue color length, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna be the next Spider Man, because Miles could go either way, which I don't think anybody's in the extreme if I'm gonna be like a law abiding, be a cop versus I'm gonna be a career criminal. But like he has both influences. But overall, he is someone who is kind of trusting of the system when the system tells you this is what is needed to keep people safe, and the idea that the system is there to help folk. I think overall what we see across most Spider-Mans is this driving need to help and support and keep people safe, which is, again, I think one of the better hero mantras we can have. It's not until the system decides that Miles has to make a sacrifice that he deems too much where he stops trusting the system. And how I say this, like Miguel and his passion of what could happen, has decided that for the stability of all the multiverses, that things has to happen, right? And he builds his whole society of Spider-Mans who are driven again by this passion to do good and to keep reality safe and to do all the help and whatever. But he's also still requiring a sacrifice from them, that these canon events, that these deaths, these things have to happen in order to keep everybody else safe. And all the Spider-Mans come and they try to trust it because again, they are people who believe in the rules and a bit I think they care more about keeping people safe. As you see, a lot of Spider-Man's heroics is around like how can I make sure nobody gets hurt versus trying to keep order, which is sometimes what he uses the cops to do in the big situations. I find it very interesting that Miles, when asked, and this is in Across the Spider-Verse, is asked to let his father die. Now, he has to kill him or anything, but let his father die. And he's like, no, that's a bridge too far. Like, that's not something I think I need to do or a canon event I need to have to know that I want to save people. And I think that's very, very fair. And a lot of my question is like, when will something be enough for you to decide that maybe the system isn't working the way it says it does or it says it's supposed to, and you're seeing with your own eyes? It took years. It took adult years and some really terrible consequences for me to be like, maybe this system isn't set up the way they tell me it is. And I can say like it wasn't Eric Gartner. I was before then. It like Philando Castile wasn't even him. I would say it was around Mike Brown when I finally like was like, whoa, this is crazy. And the system itself is set up to not support or to let individuals get away with not serving and protecting everybody. Because, like, again, the way the system talks about it, it's kind of crazy. Like we have stand your ground, like I am within my rights to kill somebody if I think they're taking my property while I'm home. Cops are allowed to kill, and not even allowed, it's like they're allowed to use the I fear for my life for both to like take out a target and then refuse to engage a target, as we saw in Uville. The Texas shooting of elementary school kids, where that police officer decided I was afraid for my life to go in and save elementary school kids. And the court said, yeah, that's fair. And so like you have to ask yourself what's in the system? What's gonna take for you to be like, that's sacrifice too far for me to decide that the system does actually work and to trust it. Because I'm gonna tell you, like, I get the hero sacrifice and how we write it in, and I'm not saying that we're all gonna be heroes and whatever. But there has to be a place where you're like, what is asking me to do in the name of the greater good? Because this Dumbledore-esque stuff is problematic. Is too much because who are we sacrificing a lot of times? And I think we sacrifice in these systems some of the most downtrodden, some of the most oppressed people because they assume that you will not care, that it doesn't hit you personally. And unfortunately, I think sometimes it does have to hit personally. And I also know there are people who have decided years ago that the system itself was too much. And this is before a Mike Brown. This is a Rodney King. The 90s gave rise to such like anti-cop rhetoric from F the Police for NWA, Cop Killer by Suicide Attendants, not Suicide Attendants, yeah, Ice-T's band. And then, of course, Killing in the Name of by Rage Against the Machine. Like, our musical landscape of people who, like, decided and saw that the system was sacrificing certain people and asking for too much. They're like, no, we should have a talk about this on a wider scale. And that's fair. Because I think for Gwen too, because it's not just a story about Miles and Across the Spider-Verse. There's Gwen there too. Because Gwen knew about all of this and she was like okay with it because she's straight from her father. I think when Gwen gets that push that maybe it's not okay to sacrifice some of these things, And maybe she might be okay with her own father dying, because I'm not speaking for Gwen here. But I think she saw what Miles was waiting to say up and say, like, I don't think this is worth it. Like this, there has to be a better way. Why do we feel like sacrificing these people and creating this lack, this hole, especially when folk have already lost people? Because don't get me wrong, he's already lost Uncle Aaron. Gwen has already lost Peter. And you're saying, but no, your canon event is you also have to lead for your great great, you know, what is the line? Oh my gosh, Spider-Man friends gonna kill me in this if all the pro cop lobbies don't. With great power comes great responsibility. But that line has to come from this death, you know? When it doesn't, because we already see in Into the Spider-Verse for Miles, it's not about with great power comes great responsibility. It's great expectations is what his main theme is. And that's very important to not forget about. And even in the newer Spider-Mans, even all the things like this idea that you have to sacrifice in order to keep everybody safe, just always has rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm just wondering for you, like, what will it take? Who is the perfect victim for you to decide that this is a system that does need to be dismantled and replaced? Because even with the situation I'm dealing with now and the city I'm in, is this is not a perfect victim. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be a perfect victim. No one deserves to be shot at, to be killed, to be executed in the street over what? When they're not harming anybody else. Because we've seen this story time and time again. We have seen police officers use their powers against what? When you expect for a victim to be more professional than the people you pay to be a professional. That's when I'm like, then the system isn't working. Like this, it is fundamentally broken. And you gotta call it out and you have to say, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing like Miles does to Miguel. And run back. Like I don't know how Beyond the Spider-Verse is gonna end. I'm not trying to make no predictions. I am interested to see what, Prowler Miles does. I'm interested to see if he's going to become a bigger villain in this movie versus if I don't even know if they're going to save his dad or not. Like I no call on that, right? I'm just waiting to see how the movie ends. But it's just very interesting to me that as somebody who wants to do good, as someone who wants to save people, who's somebody who wants the best for folk, to have to be like, you're asking for too much at this point. And I think we all have to individually ask ourselves, what are you willing to have the system ask from you? Where will you get to the point that you're saying the system is asking for too much for you to stand up and say, no, no more? Genuinely, I want to know. And a little weird thing, a little tangent here towards the end is that like Spider-Man fans are really weird about making Spider-Man, especially Peter Parker, be broken down, depressed, lonely, like isolated and poor. Like I just I'm seeing a lot of memes about it, but they're not wrong. Like this idea that the true Spider-Man is that down on the luck Spider-Man. And it's making me kind of have to refigure my this thesis I've had for a while about like what type of superhero you really gravitate to determines the type of like God that you gravitate to as well. Whether you're about a God of salvation or a God of mercy versus a God rules, or a God of love versus a God of retribution. And for me, I always figured most Spider-Man fans were like very into the God of Jesus, like Jesus as this like really like walked among us figure. But now I'm starting to see like maybe y'all like the like Jesus on the cross type of stuff too. Maybe you like the sacrificing of life bit, because y'all are always really big about the I gave up everything I love so I could do the job. Like, yeah, y'all can miss me with that. I am not a fan of the Spider-Mans giving up their loved ones to keep them safe. Cause bruh, does it ever keep them safe? Does it? Does it? I'm here for Gwen and the Amazing Spider-Man. She's like, it's my decision to be made. I decide if I'm gonna love you or not. You don't get to decide to like push me away. Sure, that didn't well with Gwen, but was it ever going to? Was it ever going to? They're always going to be targeted, especially like you. This is what really pissed me off with Peter Parker in Civil War. It's like he let freaking Tony convinced him to support the Hero Registration Act, and so then he unmasked himself. And what do? They target Aunt May straight off. I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be smart. But that's a conversation for another day. I'm not getting into that. Wow, thinking back on that reminds me of how much Civil War has determined my attitude towards some tentpole Marvel characters 30 years ago. Civil War has a hold on me about what characters I like and don't like. Bruh. It's probably 50% of the reason why I don't like Tony Stark. You can't convince me otherwise. Not MCU Tony, because Robert Downey Jr. is a gem, but mostly I was never an Iron Man fan, and I think Civil War is probably the biggest reason why, comic book wise, not the MCU. Again, separation. But now I'm rambling. I am, because I don't know what type of engagement I'm going to get on this. I feel like I'm getting a lot of people telling me, why do you hate cops? Or you say that now, but when you need them. And I say a lot of times when I need a police officer, it's so they can write the report so I can get it to my insurance company. They're glorified PDF file makers at this point, because if you look at the statistics, they don't stop crime. They do not solve crime. And if you do actually look into some of the court cases, I think there is one woman, I can't remember the case off the top of my head, but she tried to sue police because she had a restraining order against her ex-husband, and he kidnapped one of their kids, and the police department didn't do anything about it. He ended up killing all her kids, and she sued saying they're inaction, and I think the Supreme Court ruled that they did not have to do anything, which again is wild. And again, I'm vastly simplifying the case. If I can find it, I'll like put up here for y'all to look into. But there's just so many things in our legal system, in our system, and it's just in the way the structure of policing. But again, I think you could be a wonderful person who wants to make a difference, but then it comes down on you kind of sometimes being the vigilante to do the good thing. Because I've seen some cops who've been super helpful, especially to people who've been in mental health situations or domestic situations, and you know, truly want to help people. And I get that they see the worst in people. 80% of the time in their jobs, they're dealing with really some terrible stuff. But then you have the people who use it to bully. And then you have the people who become so disillusioned with humanity and what they expect that they see the worst in people, even when folk are literally asking for help. And I can't tell you how many times there have been a person having a mental health crisis who asks for help and they don't get it. They're killed. And that's terrifying. And that's a system that I think asks for too much for us to sacrifice, even for order. But that's my personal opinion. It is up to you to make that decision. And hopefully next week I'll have my thoughts together a little more. We can talk about Static Shock, but no promises. All right, here's hoping next week is a great one for you. I get to hang out with my parents for a few hours next week, so we'll see how that goes and where my headspace is after that. And boy, now that it's August, I am extending my anime fast. Although there seems like a ton of really good series, I can't wait. I'm gonna be eating good when it comes to anime in September. I am so looking forward to it. But until next time, I'll see you later. Okay. Bye. The Blurred Church of Anime podcast is produced by Black Star, aka Lauren Tillman, written by Lauren Tillman, and hosted by Lauren Tillman. Music created by EL47.